Unfortunately.
You're so funny. Well, I'm happy you're here. I think the 176 people that are with us are happy that you're here. So this is Angelica Vilpanda with the Council for Opportunity and Education, and welcome to our Connect, Discuss, Learn for college programs today. We have a jam-packed session. We will start off, as we always do with the Connect, Discuss, Learns, is to have an update of what COE knows, or is anticipating, I should say, by our Council for Opportunity and Education President, Maureen Hoyler. We will then go into an effective practice. We have Fabiola Mota from the Colorado State University, Fort Collins with us, who's going to talk about her extended orientation that she has moved from a traditional to a virtual program this year, and talk a little bit about what she's going through of how to make a program virtual for the fall. We will then come back and we will answer any unanswered questions, and we hope that we will end by 12:15 p.m. Eastern Time. So oh, I'm sorry, this is being recorded. This will be sent out to you. It takes us about a week to do that. So please be patient. We'll also put it in our PD Weekender that we send out, and our weekly that we send out during the week as well. So there's a number of ways that you'll be able to get this recording and the slide deck. Thank you. I will now turn it over to Maureen Hoyler.
Good morning, and thank you all for joining us today. I guess we should start out, we're going to start out with what we know and what we don't know. So I know that most of you are on this call, or I presume, to be honest with you, that most of you that are on this call are here to find out, why haven't they told me whether my student support services application is funded or not. And so typically what we do is we go through the entire kind of update section, and then we take questions. But we have a couple slides on this student support services situation, and then we'll take questions about that, and then we'll go on to the other items, if that works out for everybody. So the question is, why haven't they released the slate? And so let's go to the next slide. The next slide tells you what happens when the Department of Education and the administration have given final approval to the slate. The Department of Education's Office of Legislative Relations informs every member of Congress, so every senator and every congressman that has a grant in that area. So if you're the congressman for Georgia, you only get the 10th district of Georgia, you only get the programs in the 10th district. If you're in the senator from Georgia, you get all of the programs that are funded in Georgia. You don't get anybody who's not funded, you only get the funded applications. The point behind this is to give Congress just told all the administrative agencies that they had to do this so that they could get credit when an institution or agency gets a grant. So then in many states, not every state, Congress either, usually the education aid informs the institution, whether they call your governmental relations office, whether they call your president, that's up to them. Slightly after that, the Department of Education usually notifies the funding ban, but we'll get to that, and then informs those who are funded and those who are not funded. But this year, now, how do they get to a slate? In most non-TRIO grant competitions, the Department of Education has authority to kind of look at all the applications. They have a peer review process, but they don't have to fund directly against the peer review process. In TRIO, the law specifies that they have to have a peer review process. It's very clear that there have to be 3 readers for every application. Then they take the average score of those 3 readers, they add the prior experience score, and they fund down the slate until they run out of money. Now, what does it mean, run out of money? You know, if they gave everybody a 10% increase, they'd run out of money a lot quicker than if they ran out of money, if they gave everybody no increase. So it is possible to fund further down the slate or less down the slate if somewhere in the approval process, somebody says, no, I want to cut back or increase the increase that's given, not just to student support services, but to all TRIO projects. So we know that in June, the Office of Special Programs, Special Service programs, so that office headed by Dr. Bird Johnson sent a slate up for approval. It went to the Assistant Secretary. Then there's a lot of other people that have to approve it. The Office of General Counsel, the Office of the Assistant Secretary, I think the Deputy Assistant Secretary, the Deputy Secretary, the Undersecretary, probably OMB at this point in time. So what we know is somewhere along the line, somebody stopped it. Now, why did they stop it? So go back a little bit, and we know that at the beginning of July, Dr. Bird Johnson sent out a letter to the institutions or agencies that they believed were in the funding band. Well, how would they know what was in the funding band if they didn't know who was funded? Because the people in the funding band are the people immediately below the cutoff. So that's why we can be pretty confident that at least the slate that the Office of Special Student Service Programs had been sent up, and they thought that it was, one step from approval. Those institutions that were notified that they were in the funding band had 15 days to have an appeal. It really wasn't much of an appeal to have, because the people in the funding band only had 2 scores. They could have lost 1/3 of a point, or they could have lost 2/3 of a point. So the only group that, because the way the regs read, although the department doesn't always follow the regs. Come on down, Zai, okay? The people in the funding band, sorry, even people who are not parents have issues during this pandemic. So the only people that knew they couldn't get funded unless they raised their score were the ones who lost 2/3 of the point. So they had to get their appeals in last Thursday, I'm sorry. So one thing, and then when they get their appeals in, the division has the authority to accept or reject the appeal. An institution or agency only has the right to make an appeal, or can be successful in making an appeal if they can argue that the readers either judged by a non-regulatory criteria or that they ignored something that was in the right section of the proposal. When you only lose 1/3 of a point, 1 point by 1 reader, or 2 points by 2 readers, 1 point by 2 readers, it's unlikely that that kind of mistake occurred. So the division looks at everybody who appeals. If they find there's a valid appeal, then they have the application reread. And you could have it reread in a day or 2 days. So it's possible that what somebody in this chain of command was doing was not saying, oh, let's change the slate. What they were really saying was, let's only release 1 slate, send to Congress 1 slate. So let's wait for the funding band decisions to be made. Now that's pure speculation. That may not be the case. They may still release 2 slates. But everything that we know would suggest that we're very close to the point where they are going to release the slate. But we are also, I think this experience, this funding band experience, has really demonstrated that neither the department nor Congress has any sense of how important it is for you to know soon that you are going to be funded or you're not going to be funded. So why don't we take any questions people have now on this, and then we'll go on to the rest of the presentation. So I'll give you go on, Angelica.
Oh, I was just gonna say, if you, please don't raise your hand. We're not gonna actually unmute you. Go ahead and put it into the, either the Q&A, which we would prefer, or you can do it into the chat box, either one.
And Angelica, I don't know if you saw, but people are asking what 11B means.
I asked the same question, to be honest. So I don't know what that means. It was from somebody else. So Maureen, it says, so the president of our institution may find out before I do.
That's correct.
And that's
now let me stop for a second. So COE's process is that as soon as anybody hears from any congressional representative, we will ask your state president to contact your state, the legislative aides in your state to try to get the slate for your state and for your districts if it doesn't work for your district. So as soon as somebody from Maine learns, we will then ask every state president or chapter president to contact their representatives to get the slate for the entire state. They will compare, once we get that, they and we together, COE staff together, will compare the list of people on the slate with the with the people that are currently funded, and be able to tell you, and that would mean that you would learn before your president, because you'd be getting it from your peer, from your state association, or from COE, and not from the representative, because there's some representatives that take a lot longer to do this than others. Hopefully that clarifies that. So it's probable that you'll hear before your president, but the Congress would probably not call you unless you have a relationship with that office.
Maureen, someone asked why the change, why the funding ban came out first.
Well, I think the reason is that they want one slate, but other people disagree with me. So as I've said very often, they don't want to have to go back and release the second slate. So if they can make all the decisions on the funding band before they send the first slate to Congress, then there should be only one slate. Now, it also is true that in many years in the past, there's been 4 slates, okay? So the first slate is the slate of all the people initially funded that did not have a banked year, that in the course of the last couple of decades didn't get a 5-year grant when other institutions were getting a 4-year grant. And so on the first slate, they just send the ones that would have expired. On the second slate, they send the ones that would have been, that had a banked year. On the third slate, they send, I'm sorry, there's 3 slates. On the third slate, they send the ones who, after the decisions on appeals are made, whether they're funded or not. So in past years, there's been 3 slates. There could again be 3 slates. There could be 2 slates, or there could be 1 slate. The chances of them being so coordinated as to just get 1 slate is probably low, because there's so many new people, there's so many vacancies in the department. There's so much pressure on them with CARES Act money. So I don't think the decision to release the funding ban first was made, which is what they're telling Congress, was made in error. I think it was made purposely to move the process along. Unfortunately for the people who made the decision, and I think purposely and with the regs say that you're supposed to release the funded slate first, and so now they're telling everybody there is no slate, and we'll know if they are telling the truth if we find out that there's another funding ban released. But my speculation is that there's only going to be the funding ban that it was already released, which would mean that the first slate was already agreed upon.
What's your best guess when it's going to be released?
My best guess is this week.
I love your optimism, and it was we put money on this, people, way back in early July, and she said July 24th. So should we contact our rep? Are they back in the offices now?
I don't think there's any point to contacting your rep until you get the word from us or from your state president that the slates have been released. The department is not, if we move much past this week, I think that we might need a whole lot of congressional pressure, but let's give them this week, and then we'd have to gin up a lot of congressional pressure, which I think is out there given all the need you have to know whether you're funded or not.
So was the funding ban letter mailed or emailed, since most of us are still working from home?
Everything that the department does right now, I think not even just right now, I think even in the last competition was done by email.
Yeah. Is it fair to assume that if we did not get a letter a few weeks ago, we are funded? No,
you're either funded or not funded. The only thing you can assume is that you weren't in the funding ban. You either got 110 and above or 109 and below. The only thing you can assume is that you did not get 109.33 or 109.67. That's the only thing that you or anything between 109.33 and 109.67. That's all you can assume.
If you were in the funding ban, would they have sent the email to the director or the institution?
Those went to the directors, not the institution.
And then if
it didn't go to the director, it went to the name, the contact name on the application.
As the director, correct?
Well, I mean, if you're a new applicant.
Yeah, it went to
whoever was the contact.
Yeah. If not, because they want a single slate, what are others thinking might have been the reason?
Just a mess, just some person in the chain that thought, first of all, might not have been familiar with the fact that TRIO grants have to be awarded in rank order, and wanted to fund some that were 1 point below, and had to find out that to do that you would have had to, it is unusual. Even in a gear up competition, there's the peer review process. Grants are made are ranked, but then the staff of the division and everybody in the sign-off process can say, well, there's reasons we'd like to fund these institutions and not, we'd like that are right below the cutoff. They might be in a really key state in the next election. They might be from a group of institutions, let's say, I'm not historically Black colleges, that person has a particular concern about. There could be a lot of reasons that in a typical competition, you can reach down and bring an applicant up. That's not the case in the trio competition, but it doesn't mean that everybody in the review order was aware of that.
We have a couple of questions about the quote unquote carryover, which is not the right term.
Okay,
But we're gonna
go
wait. Yes. So Jennifer and Lauren, we're not gonna answer your questions at this time. The only outstanding question is, do you know historically how many programs are not rewarded?
It all depends on how much money there is. So it's never okay, there's not a rule, but I would say that in a typical competition, somewhere between 5 and 10% of existing programs don't score above the cutoff. Those programs that don't score above the cutoff tend to be institutions that are probably not on this call, institutions that are not very well connected to their peers, either because they have a very experienced director who thinks they know everything about writing a trio grant, or because they have a very new director who doesn't know anything about how to relate to the community of support that's out there. So it's unlikely that it's probably at least 99% of you on this webinar are funded. But there will be institutions and agencies out there that are not funded.
Perfect. Thanks, Maureen. Go ahead, and we're going to stop the questions now and go back to your presentation. So I'm going to skip it to the next slide.
So what about money unexpended in 2019, 2020? So both of these are governed by a section in the OMB Uniform Guidance, section 200-308D, and D3 governs situations where institutions and agencies are in the middle of a grant cycle. So they're not in the last year of a grant cycle. In that instance, the Department of Education has the authority to carry forward unobligated balances to subsequent funding periods. The Department of Education has notified the field that they have no ceiling on the amount of money that they will allow to be carried forward from one cycle to the next. That does not mean that when you submit a budget that includes your carry forward, you don't have to tell them how you're going to use that money and have a reasonable budget for 2020-21 that includes your projected carryover. So if you said, for example, I have $40,000 of carryover and I'm going to take all that $40,000 and give the project director a one-time bonus of $40,000, that budget probably wouldn't be approved. So this is not an absolute license to carry over and do whatever you want with what you haven't spent this year. But in terms of McNair, the assumption will be that if you can conservatively estimate your carryover and come up with a plan to spend it in 2020-21, that nothing will happen really. That you'll get a grant award document for the amount of money that you got this year, but plus the percentage increase that they agree to give everybody. That they won't say anything to you about your carryover unless you tell them that you're going to have a significant amount. And then when you submit the budget for those two amounts added together, that budget will be approved. When you get that approval, you'll just keep spending down your 2019-20 money before you go into your 2021 money. This section of this section applies both to McNair projects and to student support services projects that have a banked year. So, so that's carryover. In institutions and agencies that are in the last year of their grant, the department has the authority under section 200-308 D2 to initiate a one-time extension of the period of performance of the grant, so of up to 12 months. So instead of ending on August 31st, 2020, the department has the authority to extend the closing date up to August 31st, 2021. For one-time extensions, the recipient has to do certain things. They have to notify the department at least 10 calendar days before August 31st, 2020 that they're going to ask for this extension. It may be that the department gives a blanket extension. We don't have that yet. The monies that are unexpended in 2020-21, in 1920, have to be used to do things that you had hoped to do in 1920 and were unable to do. The frequently asked questions that were released by the department indicated that they intended that to exercise this authority that they have with all student support services grants, that they intended to allow these one-time extensions. So I guess should we just answer questions about these two? If we have any questions about either of these, why don't we take them now?
Sure. So somebody raised their hand, and again, I would like to remind you that if you would go ahead and put it into the Q&A box, that would be fantastic instead of raising your hand. Should we wait to submit our 90-day extension for this year's funds until we hear about the SSS awards?
Okay, two things. Remember, it's not a 90-day extension. It can be a one-year extension.
I think they're getting confused because if they're not funded, then they could use the one-time extension, which is typically 90 days if they're not funded to close out their program.
Right. Nobody should be submitting any request for an extension in your grant until you hear more. It may be that in the letter that notifies you're funded, they'll include this fact. So don't do anything now.
So someone said, I've heard that the no-cost extension are for grants that are not refunded.
In typical years, again, not this year, the only no cost is the only extension of the grant year has been to those that are not funded. In this year, the department has already indicated on its frequently asked questions that it intends to utilize this not just with grants that are not refunded, but with all grants.
And it says, I've also heard that you can't have two grants open at the same time.
That's not true.
And I will tell you that there are program specialists that are saying that, Maureen. That's why I think this person is saying this. Someone asked, how would you frame the request for a SSS one-time extension to your program specialist?
You wouldn't yet. Remember, you have to wait to see what they're going to say when they contact you with your because they may tell you at that time. So you can't. I know this is really annoying. But there's nothing you can do right now till this slate is released. And at that point in time, we can. It will all be one process. So remember, you have until August 21st, 2020 to notify the department about this request for the one-time extension. So at the beginning of August, in I guess the next time we do a CDL, we will have an answer to this, but it's kind of a question that's a little too early right now.
And Maureen, someone's saying that Linda Bird Johnson said this on a webinar. I don't remember her saying this, but
I think we've been on every webinar. I talk with Dr. Bird Johnson almost every week. I don't think she said this.
okay. Someone said so we're not going to talk about a no-cost extension right now. We're going to get into, just like Maureen just said, we're going to get into specific details once the SSS slate is released, and we're getting closer to that 10-day. You got to get it in, as it says on this slide here, 10 days before the new your new award starts, or the end of your award is. So we're going to hold these kind of questions until our next CDO.
Okay, all of you who have been on these CDLs probably are so sick of this, these slides, that you want to throw eggs at Jelly and myself. And Vanessa, if she had her face up, you would be throwing eggs at her too, but she's wise enough not to let her face be up. But so much of what is allowed, what is appropriate in the management of trail grants goes back to the OMB Uniform Guidance. And the OMB Uniform Guidance 200.308C, so this is the paragraph right above the paragraph that we were talking about in terms of carryover and no-cost extension, says that there's only 7 times that you need approval from the department to do something. One is if you change the scope of your grant. 2 is if you change the director. That's the person on the grant award document whose name is in the box that says key personnel. 3, if that person is disengaged, on leave, not working for the program for more than 3 months, or if they, or if you want to reduce their time by 25%. So if you want to take them from 100 to 74%, you need approval. If you want to purchase equipment, or if you want to move money from participant support costs, so that would be the line in McNair that is stipends and room and board, certainly stipends and room and board and tuition, to other. In student support services, it would be from grant aid to, okay, not, I'm sorry, I'm going to go backward. Not to other, but to any other line item. Whether it's a line item that you had before or a line item that you're creating. If you're not going to spend that amount, you have to have approval. In student support services, participant support costs is grant aid. So you're going to move money from grant aid to any other line item, whether it's one you have in your budget or don't have in your budget, you need approval. If you're going to subaward, or you're going to, that's number 6, or you're going to change the amount of cost sharing. Those are the only times you need approval. You don't need approval. You don't need approval to create a line. You don't need approval to move money from one line to another, except in that, in the instances that people mentioned, like equipment or moving money out of participant support costs. So the most recent letter that came from the department, that was signed by Dr. King, said you should ask for permission to buy PPE. Well, PPE is a supply. The uniform guidance says you don't need approval to buy supplies. Now, you have to make sure that the supplies you buy are reasonable. That means that they you're paying a fair price for them, that you need them to do your work, or they facilitate your work, and that they're allocable, that they benefit the students in your program. So you couldn't buy PPE for your whole college with the Student Support Services grant, but certainly if you're having students come to in-person activities and you want to make sure they all have a face mask, just you could buy face masks. Again, it has to be reasonable and allocable, but you don't have to ask for permission to buy supplies to carry out the work that you any more than you would need permission to buy pens or notebooks or something else. The next slide, please. And supplies means all tangible personal property other than those described as equipment. Equipment is, and this is directly out of the OMB, a computer is a supply if the acquisition cost is lesser than the capitalization cost established by your college, or regardless of the length of its useful life. So, so computers are supplies as long as they don't cost more than your institution has said equipment costs. So, or $5,000, whichever is less. The federal standard for equipment is $5,000. So if you're buying anything that costs less than $5,000, unless your institution has a different definition of equipment. Now, why would your institution have a different definition of equipment? It might have a different definition of equipment because you have an old vice president for business and finance and he doesn't want to change the policy, or, you know, there could be a lot of reasons that may not make, but part of the reason is what equipment is capitalized. Equipment is put on the assets. It's included in the assets of the institution when they have their balance, when they do their balance sheets every year. It's depreciated. It has less value. Let's say you have a huge investment in technology that the institution purchased at $1 million. Okay, that shows up as an asset, and then it's the next year it's probably only worth $800,000 on the balance sheet. But that might be the reason that your institution has a lower definition of equipment, because of the way they want what they want to include on their balance sheet. But so even though that letter talked about technology and protective supplies, the OMB circular itself gives your institution the authority to make these purchases. And let's go to the next slide. And the earlier frequently asked question said, it is permissible to reallocate money from line items to purchase electronic devices such as laptops or tablets for students to continue to receive services. Yes, in many cases it is permissible. Funds may be reallocated from the approved budget to cover the cost of electronic devices. But grantees to explain the reallocation and provide supporting documentation. So you can do it. You could say you do it, but don't ask for permission to do these things. You have to do these things in order. You had to do them back in April. So again, if they're when you submit your it's very hard to. I think probably that. Angelica, they haven't asked for a revised 1920 budget from Student Support Services yet, have they?
They have not for student support services.
So at the point in time that you get your notification, you do want to clear up and send to the department, which will explain the money that you're going to use in 2021 too. So it's kind of a one-shot. Might be two letters, but it's done at the same time. He said, explain if you have any money left over in 1920 and how you're going to use it in 2021. And it's a summary of what you did. Remember that the frequently asked questions said you didn't have to get prior approval. You had to notify the department about the things that you did that that were necessary under the pandemic that you would not have normally done.
Maureen, We have a couple more slides, but it is 11:45. Did you want to switch over to the effective practices and then pick this back up?
That sounds excellent.
Okay,
That
and
sounds
then there's a couple of questions that we'll take at the end as well that we've received. Thank you all. We are going to stop. We will pick this particular PowerPoint back up, but right now I'd like to introduce Fabiola Mora. She's the Director of Student Support Services, as well as some other programs at the Colorado State University, Fort Collins. Today she's going to speak about, Today she is going to talk to us about her virtual extended orientation that she is planning for the fall year. I am going to, if I know how to do this, I'm going to end my show. Fabiola, can you bring up your presentation for me? And thank you for being patient. I know a lot of people had a lot of questions, so I appreciate, and I know that we're running behind in time.
Jelly, should I just do that on my computer?
Yes.
Okay, and then share my screen
Yes.
with me. Okay. Can you see my screen?
I cannot. Did you do share screen first?
Yes. Okay.
There you
Now
go.
can you see
Here
it?
it goes. Yep. Perfect.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Like Angelica said, my name is Fabiola Mora. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I serve as the director of the Academic Advancement Center at CSU, which houses our TRIO student support services, as well as some institutionally funded programs. I've been working with TRIO student populations for over 10 years, and I just recently started my doctoral journey at Colorado State University, but I'm really excited to be with you today to share a little bit more about how we're transitioning our orientation into a virtual format. To begin, I just wanted to acknowledge that we're going through some unprecedented times. We're living through and recognize that higher education and student affairs professionals are being called upon to support students in ways we haven't experienced before, right? And I also want to recognize that the COVID-19 crisis has a disproportionate impact on marginalized students, which we serve, who are already underserved by our institutions. And so our work during this time is even more critical. We must be able to balance, right, centering equity so we do not contribute to the larger opportunity gaps for our student populations during this time, while also figuring out how to adjust our programs in a virtual environment with also university guidelines. And all of us may be experiencing different restrictions about what we can and cannot do on our campuses and with our programs. So, you know, we are built for this. When we talk about our students, right, we talk about how resilient they are, how adaptable, how much grit they have. We too, as professionals in this field, hold all of that. So in that spirit, I want to share a little bit about how our extended orientation has worked pre-pandemic, and then spend more time sharing about what we are exploring and doing for orientation post-pandemic. So up on the screen, you'll see a couple of agendas that just outline our first year extended orientation programs. Our orientations usually span several days with different tracks for first year, transfer, and our continuing CSU students who have applied to our program. So they might be sophomores, juniors who have applied later to join our program. We usually help students move into the residence halls early before the larger population comes on campus, and we do programming throughout the day. And simultaneously, we are also hosting parent and community orientation tracks for those who join our students. This is what our transfer and continuing student orientation typically looks like. So they go through a similar program, but much more of the focus is on expanding their knowledge since they are all bringing some type of higher education experience already. So what's really important for us during transfer and continuing student extended orientation is that we help them get connected to other resources on campus, like our Adult Learner Veteran Services Program, our Fostering Success Program, our Transfer Center, things that will support them beyond the typical first year transition information. And so our extended orientation programs, like many of yours, really help set a foundation, right, and build a community that sets the tone for students' transition and experience within our university and our program. This pandemic, though, and university guidelines have really required us as a program to rethink the ways we need to shift to meet students where they're at now. So first, for us, this really began with dedicating time to discuss the purpose of our extended orientation programs. So if you're comfortable in the chat box, as I'm talking, feel free to share, like, what is the purpose of your extended orientation programs? And maybe any type of welcome events that you have. I wanted to start with that piece first because it's really important for us to assess our learning outcomes, right? We have set learning outcomes for all of the programs within our TRIO Student Support Services. And so we as a staff had to take a step back and really have a discussion about what it is that we want students to experience and learn as a result of participating in our extended orientation programs. And so I wanted to share that just so you can get a glimpse of an idea of our planning process moving forward. So some of our learning outcomes included, right, building a community like many of you are sharing, right, within the AAC, setting program expectations, making sure that they know what the expectations are as a participant in our program, that they are able to identify resources and connect with faculty, students, and staff at the university, similar to a lot of the things that folks have shared. An additional piece that we will do as soon as our selection process concludes, and in our program, we will have all of our students selected by this week. For programs who have rolling admissions, this is something that you can incorporate into your application or interview, your intake process, whatever that looks like for you. But some of our, what we will be doing is assessing student needs, right? What are the things that our students are hoping to learn about at their new student welcome orientation? What questions do they still have about CSU? So they've already gone through the university one-day orientation program, right? But what is left for them? What's lingering for them that they need to have addressed? What would be most beneficial to your transition to CSU? And what CSU resources do you want to learn? And we really want to use student voice to inform our extended orientation events in combination with some of the things that we know, right, as student affairs professionals are important for students to have. And finally, thinking about how to align our efforts to university-wide initiatives. So thinking about the ways that we help students build connections to staff, faculty, and other students. We know that their ability to connect, right, to build this web of support is super important to their success at our institutions. So with all of that in mind, we have decided to extend our orientation events throughout the entire month of August. So we are working on welcome emails, phone calls, videos, social media, live events, drop-in hours, checklists. So we have mailed checklists of all of the things that are important for students to prepare prior to coming to our university. We are doing community events that are going to begin right as they would be moving into the residence halls, but they're all going to be virtual. So our team has come up with all sorts of ideas like game nights, movie nights, different types of, there's different ways that you can create online lounge spaces for students to really build that community. All of that will incorporate our staff, our student staff, our peer mentors. We really, because that is one of our major learning outcomes, we really want students to build that strong foundation on our campus, we're not going to be able to be on campus and have an open center, but some classes are going to be face-to-face. So although we might not be physically in the center or on campus, our students are still going to be there. So we really want to figure out how do we get them connected, how do we build that community in virtual spaces so that they can know each other, since they are going to be on campus, living in the residence halls, all of those pieces. Some of the other things that we have incorporated are virtual campus scavenger hunts, and identity-based spaces. So we will be facilitating conversation in spaces with like our first-gen students, our students with disabilities, our Pell-eligible students, our students of color. We focus a lot on identity development within our program, and so we will be facilitating some of those as students are being welcomed into our program and the university. Now for the synchronous piece of our orientation, I've just included some of the major pieces. We will do some introductions and welcomes, and Zoom and other platforms have great capacity to allow us to do breakout spaces, to allow you to use whiteboards. There's lots of ways that we are thinking about how do we use what software we have. Our university also has different online software like that we can use through Canvas, through Microsoft Teams. And so we've really explored how do we incorporate all of those pieces into our synchronous program. And it also allows us to teach students, right, what they will be experiencing as they too will be logging on virtually to some of their classes. So we're using it both as like a learning experience for our students. We will be having AAC student panels. So our current students sharing their stories, sharing advice, being available to answer any questions that come up. Part of our orientation programs also include sign up times for all of the different services. And so we will be using breakout rooms to allow students to talk with our academic programs, who coordinates all of our tutoring, our supplemental academic instruction, our Pathways to Academic Success seminars, because we want to give students opportunities to sign up. And we know that the earlier that we can get them engaged and connected with our staff and with our services, the more likely they will be to continue in our program. And then we'll be having a variety of drop-in hours for students, similar, I think, to the CDLs that we are participating in now, right? There will be topic-specific drop-in hours based on what we learn from the student needs assessment. So if students really have a lot of questions about financial aid, we have a liaison with the Office of Financial Aid who will be joining us for those drop-in hours. And so we will keep assessing what are the things that are coming up for students and set drop-in hours that are topic specific. We will do some closing activities, additional community builders, and then we'll end with the program evaluation. The program evaluation I put on here because it has been really critical to the development of our programs in this virtual environment. So as soon as we went, we knew that we were going to go virtual. We did an evaluation and assessment of, what are the students' needs? What are they missing? What are they needing from us? Similarly, we'll do that through this, through our first year orientation, right? What's left that we didn't cover? And we'll be doing that throughout the semester as well. So we'll be adding orientation programs throughout. And so we've made this decision because we didn't want to, right, just take what we would typically do in person and just duplicate it online. That is exhausting, as we all know, those of us who have been on Zoom meetings all day, every day, right? It's not as engaging. And so we have made the conscious choice to split up the major pieces of our orientation programs in hopes that we will reach this. So at Colorado State University, we have this map. And these are all the pieces that we believe are really critical to student success at CSU. And so our hope is that through our virtual orientation programs and the variety of things that we'll offer, that will really build this web of support around students so that they either know who to go to, they can ask us any questions that they might have, and that they really start their journey at CSU strong. I know I covered that really quickly, but if there are, I'm going to stop sharing my screen, but if you have any questions, feel free to type them in, and I'm happy to answer anything that may have come up.
Angelica, we can't hear you.
Thank you. I would have just kept talking and talking. Thank you, Fabiola. If we have one question here, it says, will your staff be on campus or working from home?
Our staff, so we're doing a combination. Our university is only approving like face-to-face interaction per student request. So we are going to be setting up our offices to be available if students request to see a staff member, but the majority will be spent working remotely.
Would you share the resource? They asked, would you share the resource document that you just had up, which I think is your slide deck? And I will say that it will be a part of the slide deck that we send out with the recording of this presentation. Someone said, thank you, outstanding information. And someone asked, what is the staff to student ratio?
So in our program, the staff to student ratio is about 65 to 70 students per staff. We do have institutional funding that helps support our staffing model. And so I know that that may not be possible for some programs, right? But that is where we are because of the institutional funding we receive.
Fabiola, I think that's it for right now. I appreciate you. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to go back to talking about an SSS and McNair update for everyone. But Fabiola will stay on. She'll be with us. So if you do have any lingering questions, you can go ahead and put them into the Q&A for her as well. I'm going to share my screen. Can everybody see it? Can you see it, Maureen?
Yes, I can.
Okay. These two screens. Yeah. That's not what I wanted to do. Okay. Perfect. So Maureen, we're on grant aid.
Okay. I just wanted to remind everybody, and I understand, and I've just reminded the Deputy Assistant Secretary that you can't really move forward on many things until they move forward on many things. For example, there is a request before the department from the COE board that they utilize the authority that the department has in the CARES Act to reduce the minimum grant allowed under the grant aid provision to $50, as well as to eliminate the cost sharing provision in the law and regulation, as well as to eliminate the provision to limit grant aid to first and second year students. So these requests are still before the department. The department hasn't said no to any of these requests. We're trying to make sure that they respond to them before their responses become irrelevant. So that's the grant aid one. The other one that is important, both in terms of your budgets for this year and next, is stipends with McNair. With respect to, we've requested that the stipend be increased to $5,200 for both this year and next year. And we've requested for student support services that they be allowed to give a stipend of $100 a month, again, both for 1920 and 2021. Again, these are requests for modifications that the department could make under the CARES Act. We haven't gotten a response to those yet. So I guess we should go to questions. And if you have any questions that we are not able to answer, which many we're not able to answer, and hopefully we tell you that, but that you think we could answer, please feel free to email or call either myself or Angelica, whose numbers are on on the slide. So let's take some questions.
Perfect. So one question that came in before we switched to the effective practice was why did they tell us, I think it's they, as the Department of Ed, told us to ask permission to buy PP&E and laptops? It's very confusing.
Okay, I think the reason that they did it is, that is twofold, okay? One, program specialists within the division, program specialists across the department have very little professional development. They're not given the opportunity to really study the law and regulations. And therefore, they sometimes shoot from the hip rather than going to the law and regulations to answer questions. And so I think they were saying these things to people, and the department didn't want to didn't want to undermine their staff. And that's probably the reason that they said that you needed this approval. I suppose that it's also possible that they were getting broad requests to buy, because the CARES Act does give them broad authority to provide PPE for individuals outside of student support services or McNair. You know, broad authority to use the grant to benefit maybe low-income first-generation students, but not necessarily those that are in your programs, and that they that's the reason that they gave this advice.
The stipend increase for McNair is still pending, correct?
That's correct.
For student support services programs, would that be laptops to give to students or to loan to students?
Well, again, you probably would start out saying it's a loan. You know, you probably would give it to a person and say, this is for you to use during your period of involvement in student support services. And if the student dropped out of school 2 months later, you'd want to get the laptop back. But because it's a supply, you don't have any you don't have any responsibility to track it. So if the student doesn't give it back to you, or if it's stolen, or you don't have any responsibility, but probably to be most reasonable, you would give it to them to participate in the program. And if they chose not to participate in the program, you would ask for the computer back. But it's not like you would have to loan it to them on 3-month increments or something. You would loan it to them. And at some point in time, it would become a gift, because it wouldn't have any value, or you would give it to them because it wouldn't have any value to take it back.
My program specialist denied our 2019-2020 budget request to purchase laptops for staff. They indicated they do not approve electronic purchases during the final year of the grant cycle.
And so what did you do? What did they do?
Well, we'll go ahead and wait until she comes back on that one.
Okay.
Let me see.
The problem is,
they didn't purchase them.
they did not.
No, they didn't.
See, the FAQs would have given you the authority to purchase them. Now it becomes probably less. You have less of an argument to purchase them now.
Mm-hmm.
So if you had bought them back in April, there'd be no question of being able to justify them.
They denied it because it was 5th year, and they denied it last August. So.
Oh, last August.
Yeah.
But you didn't buy them why didn't you buy them now? Why didn't you buy them in May when everything changed with, see,
COVID.
COVID and the CARES Act changed everything. So what governed back in August of 2019 did not govern in April of 2020. So the fact that they denied it then doesn't have any implications for 2020, but it does have some implications a week before the grants are going to be announced. But if the grants are announced and you're funded, then go buy them. Go buy those computers, okay?
Absolutely. All right, I'm just checking to see if I have any more that I've missed. Hold on, the chat box gets pretty. Okay, if we've looked over any of your questions, please put them back in the chat box or the Q&A. One said, why wouldn't the purchase of new laptops for staff now be justified given that we just learned that we are continuing to work from home? Why wouldn't the purchase?
Well, if you don't get the grant, if you find out tomorrow that you didn't get funded, you would have bought 10 laptops that have no use, that are not allocable, that do not benefit student support services students. If you find out tomorrow that you're funded, then you can buy them. But I think you have to wait to be reasonable. I think you have to wait till you find out if you're funded or not. Again, remember, these are my opinions, and you can say this woman is crazy. I don't think that argument makes any sense. Okay, you don't have to justify your decision to me. You have to be able to be confident that the argument that you're making is an argument that and you don't have to justify it really to the Department of Education. Your audience is your own grants office and the audit that will be taking place on your grant. So that's why I say I think it makes more sense to wait, because then clearly you need those laptops to work from home. And I don't have the regulations in front of me, but the regulations are clear that it would be allowable for staff as well as students.
Someone said, I purchased laptops for students' use after moving funds due to the new requirement. I then sent an email and have not received a response.
Well, you don't need a response. It's a supply. You notified them. That's all you have to do.
Someone, her institution won't make a transfer. She's requested twice to move money from salaries to supplies, which she doesn't need a permission on, but she hasn't heard, but her institution won't do it. Do you have any advice?
What I would do is contact Angelica, see if you can set up a call with myself or Angelica in your business office to just go over that particular guidance from the department. Or we also offer more intensive professional development or technical assistance to institutions, so that people really understand the authority that the institution has. A lot of instances, and that's paid technical assistance as opposed to free technical assistance. A telephone call would be free.
Yeah, but we can start off with the conversation of what you exactly need. This will be the last question of this Connect, Discuss, Learn. And this is, what about Wi-Fi for a staff member who does not have internet? I know we can for students, but what about for staff?
Okay. Remember, you have to think these things through yourself. If you could buy a computer for a staff member and a student, why couldn't you buy Wi-Fi for a staff member and a student? Is there any argument out there that would say you can't buy it for the staff member? Now, here would be the issue. The issue would be, am I going to use this Wi-Fi and watch Netflix? And therefore, should I allocate the cost of the Wi-Fi between a personal benefit to the staff member and a benefit that is only used for to work. So I would talk with the staff member about that, the use of the Wi-Fi and how that would be, how it would be used.
Well, we thank you for coming and being with us today. This concludes our Connect, Discuss, Learn. If you have any outstanding questions, please do not hesitate to write to Angelica Villalpando. It's on the screen for you, as well as Maureen Hoyler, whoever that you feel the most comfortable with, and we will get back to you. Thank you for Maureen. Again, thank you, Fabiola, for your effective practice. We appreciate you being with us today, and this concludes our webinar. Have a great day.
Thank you, and good luck.